When in Ottawa, we meet on the traditional unceded territory of the Algonquin people. Here, where I am, is the traditional territory of the Anishinaabe, Haudenosaunee, and Chinantan First Nations. Pursuant to Standing Order 108-2 and the motion adopted on February 25th, 2021, the committee continues its study of the subject matter of Bill C-15, an act respecting the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples, and to make related and consequential amendments to other acts. To ensure an orderly meeting, participants may speak and listen in the official language of their choice. The globe at the bottom of the screen has the icon has the ability to select either floor, English, or French. Select what you choose, and if you do speak in two languages, either English or French, you don't need to change that. The technology will pick it up. When speaking, ensure that your video is turned on. Please speak slowly and clearly. When you're not speaking, your mic should be on mute. Pursuant to the motion adopted on March 9th, 2021, I must inform the committee that Naten Obed has not completed a technical pretest. With us today by video conference are the following witnesses from the AFN. National Chief Perry Bellegarde, Wilton Littlechild, and Mary Ellen Turpel-Lafond. Thank you all for taking time to appear. The committee is being asked to allow an extension of the witness statement time beyond the current approved 6 minutes. As chair, I'm reluctant to adjust the rule in view of the unfairness to the previous witnesses and the precedent for future witnesses. As well, we have a number of written submissions which have taken more than 6 minutes to read, which suggests to me that, as we often tell witnesses, any matters or points of view that they feel may have been missed or need further emphasis would be accepted after the meeting as supplemental documents to their brief. In view of this, I now ask the committee for unanimous consent that, notwithstanding the routine motion governing time for opening remarks and questioning of witnesses, that the AFN be allotted up to 15 minutes for their opening presentation. Those that do not wish to give unanimous consent, please unmute now to indicate. So, is there anyone who is opposed to unanimous consent for the extension? Seeing none, we approve the extension for 15 minutes to Mr. Bellegarde and his associates. And so, Perry, welcome. And it's so nice to have this opportunity to hear from AFN. And so please go ahead for 15 minutes.
Well, thank you, Chair, and thank you to all the committee members for agreeing for the 15-minute time. So, nistamina pixquineo nabsisi nenascomun kenascom tenwa kakia no temtek nuako magnak. Nista ogima pisio wase sega seo. Kuskateo mascosis utini at Treaty 4 territory. Nistamina no taunan semantu kanascomtin Algonquins huma odawa kenascomtinwal. Just a little bit in Cree, my friends and relatives, I'm very happy to be here with you all. I used one of my spirit names, King Thunderbird Child is one of the names I carry, and I'm from Little Black Bear First Nations Treaty 4 territory in southern Saskatchewan. And I gave thanks to the Creator for this beautiful day. And I acknowledge as well the Algonquin peoples here in the Odawa territory, where I'm sitting and working from today in their ancestral lands. So again, Chairman Bertina, and honorable committee members, thank you so much for this opportunity. I also want to acknowledge Mary Ellen Turpel-Lafond, who's alongside or with me on this presentation with Willie Littlechild as well. And I acknowledge them and thank them for their work. Our Assembly of First Nation has long supported the adoption of a clear and strong legislative blueprint to advance the implementation of the United Nations Declaration. And I appeared before this committee 3 years ago to support the adoption of Bill C-262, the private members bill brought forward by Romeo Saganash. So I'm very pleased to now speak in support of a government bill that builds on the foundations of Bill C-262. The Assembly of First Nations Chiefs and Assembly have passed numerous resolutions calling for the full implementation of the Declaration. and these resolutions included support for the adoption of Bill C-262. When a filibuster prevented Bill C-262 from coming to a final vote in the Senate, where it did have sufficient support to be passed, our Assembly of First Nations Chiefs and Assembly passed a resolution in December of 2019 calling for a government bill as strong or stronger than Bill C-262. That's my mandate. That's the direction the Chiefs of Canada gave me as National Chief, to get a bill, a government bill that's as strong as Bill C-262. So Bill C-15 meets that test. Bill C-15 provides a principled and pragmatic path forward to ensure that Canada respects and upholds fundamental human rights that have been affirmed and reaffirmed by the international community many times through consensus resolutions of the UN General Assembly. I want to emphasize that the declaration did not create new rights, and neither does this proposed new bill. They also do not impinge on or detract from any inherent or treaty rights. When I testified before this committee about Bill C-262, I felt very strongly that a collaborative and coordinated approach to implementing the declaration was critical to closing the social and economic gap facing First Nations people. So today, I am even more convinced that implementation legislation is the right way forward. I also applaud the work of elected officials in other jurisdictions who have taken steps to implement the United Nations Declaration, and note that Chiefs worked with British Columbia in achieving the unanimous passage of a law in the British Columbia Legislative Assembly on November 28, 2019. Given the deep racism and discrimination that First Nations still face every day, Bill C-15's critical commitment to combat all forms of discrimination makes this bill both timely and urgent. I have seen how in BC, with the implementation of the declaration, important work is being undertaken to address the racism against Indigenous peoples in the healthcare system, using the standards in the declaration to bring people together in the healthcare system. Now, we know that every bill can be improved. Since the tabling of Bill C-15, we have heard critiques and suggestions for improvement, most importantly from Indigenous peoples ourselves. Some AFN regional chiefs and First Nations leadership have appeared before you and have identified areas for improvement from the regional perspectives. You should listen carefully to those positions. And in Canada, some First Nations are in support of Bill C-15, some are against C-15, while others support it with amendments. What I am tabling today is a contribution from the Assembly of First Nations that constitutes some relatively straightforward suggestions for improvements. These are intended to respond to the overall objective of First Nations to make the bill stronger and clearer. So this is indeed an historic moment. The Truth and Reconciliation Commission of Canada looked closely at the UN Declaration and concluded that the Declaration was the framework for reconciliation at all levels and across all sectors of Canadian society. They set that out as their first principle of reconciliation. That's how important the Declaration is as a source of guidance and as a foundation for action. And Canadians have embraced the cause of reconciliation. Implementation legislation is crucial to bringing that commitment to life. With the improvements we've tabled, Bill C-15 will better enable us to move forward in a collaborative and coordinated way, consistent with First Nations treaty and inherent rights and Canada's legal obligations. I'd like to review those 12 improvements right now. Number 1, Preamble Clause 6. It's our recommendation that this provision is not accurate and should be deleted. Number 2, Preamble Clause 8. It's our recommendation that the word racism be added to this clause. Racism is a critical daily concern for First Nations, and we believe strongly that it should be named. Number 3, Preamble Clause 9. It's our recommendation that the paragraph include explicit reference to the doctrines of discovery and terra nullius, and to be clear that, as the Supreme Court of Canada said in Chilcotin Nation case in 2014, These doctrines should not be in part of the law or policies of Canada. Clause 2, subsection 2. It's our recommendation that the non-derogation clause be revised to more accurately reflect the wording of the UN Declaration, Article 37. The previous approach in Bill C-262 and wording has been provided for you to consider. Number 5, it's also recommended that you consider adding 2 new clauses in the interpretation section. Clause 2, to avoid any confusion or misinterpretation on some matters of great importance to First Nations. These 2 new clauses are, here's a new clause, 2 subsection 4. For greater certainty, the rights of Indigenous peoples, including treaty rights, must be interpreted flexibly so as to permit their evolution over time, and any approach constituting frozen rights must be rejected. This provision is important because we cannot permit interpretation of treaty rights or any of the rights of Indigenous peoples as frozen in time. Approaches that reflect stereotypes and old ideas, especially on treaty rights, must be overcome as an ongoing obstacle to moving forward. Number 6, and this is another new clause, 2 subsection 5. For greater certainty, nothing in this act is to be construed so as to diminish or extinguish the rights of Indigenous peoples, including treaty rights. This provision makes it clear that extinguishment of the rights of Indigenous peoples is not acceptable under any circumstances and cannot be part of Canada's laws or policies. Indigenous peoples have been subject to policies that sought to extinguish our rights and identities, such as the residential schools and other unilateral Crown policies. Extinguishment is a systemic barrier to reconciliation that Canada must permanently and clearly reject. Number 7, it's our recommendation that the subtitle for Clause 4, or the purpose section, is incorrect, and it should be titled Purposes. Romeo Saganass spoke to this issue in his appearance on March 11, 2021. This is an obvious grammatical problem, but could lead to inaccurate interpretation in the future and should be fixed, as it has been flagged as concern by First Nations. I urge you to correct this at this study of the bill by committee members. Number 8, in this same clause, it's recommended that the word framework be removed. As acknowledged in the preamble of this bill, the UN Declaration itself is the framework, and reference to other frameworks simply confuse the task and cause confusion. Number 9, I also note that the reference to the Government of Canada in the Purpose Clause 4 must be removed because Canada's obligation extends not just to government, but to Parliament, and this wording as it currently reads is inaccurate. The phrase Government of Canada could simply be removed, and I recommend you do that as we show in the table submitted. Number 10, it's recommended that the time frame set out in Clause 6 for the action plan be reduced from the 3 years to 2 years. Implementation is already long overdue. Canada should have begun implementing the declaration when it was adopted as a global minimum standard in 2007. Canada has committed to implement the declaration without qualification since 2017, so I don't think it's necessary to wait another 3 years. Number 11, similar to the preamble provision in 8, recommendation to add the word racism, this word also must be added to Clause 6, subsection 2A, as the wording is tracked in both parts of the bill. And number 12, finally, I recommend that the words implement, implementing, implementation be used in the bill only in relation to implementing the declaration. For all other uses, I recommend that expressions like carry out be substituted, and you will see those suggestions in the table attached. If I have missed other examples, as the First Nations Leadership Council of British Columbia has indicated in their submission to you, we adopt those recommendations to ensure that the entire bill is corrected so that implementation is only used in relation to implementing the declaration. C-15 deserves the support of this committee, and it deserves the support of all members of Parliament and senators. In my view, the improvements we have brought forward are modest and reasonable, and I urge you to adopt them when your committee gets to that part of your deliberations. To conclude, I want to be very clear. The AFN is eager to see Bill C-15 move forward to final votes in the House of Commons and the Senate as soon as possible. First Nations leaders and legal experts like Chief Littlechild poured their heart and soul into the creation of the Declaration. They did this for a reason. They went to the United Nations year after year for more than 2 decades because they saw this international human rights instrument as key to building a new relationship with Canada. Canadian government officials were also active participants through that long process at the United Nations. In fact, Canada deserves a lot of credit for helping to build support among other states so that the declaration could be finalized and adopted. And this is something that we accomplished together. And this is something to which Canadians can be proud of. And yet, despite what was accomplished, more than 13 years have passed now since the declaration was adopted by the UN General Assembly. More than 13 years since the UN proclaimed the declaration as the minimum standard for the survival, dignity, and well-being of Indigenous peoples in all regions of the world. So in this time, we have had expressions of support for the declaration from federal, provincial, territorial, and municipal governments of all political stripes. Canada has been part of numerous consensus resolutions at the UN committing to domestic implementation. Canada has made commitments to the Indigenous peoples of the world that it would implement the declaration. It's time to complete this and make good on these commitments by working together. Canada has added the commitment to implement the UN declaration into the text of other laws passed by Parliament, including important bills on inherent right of self-government in relation to child welfare and Indigenous languages. What we still lack, however, is the legislation that implements the declaration and sets us on a course of recognition of rights and provides a framework for reconciliation as the TRC wisely called for action. Bill C-15 provides that path. It's important for First Nations, and I believe it is important for all Canadians to seize this opportunity now. We need to hear the words royal assent before the end of June. Thank you. Kinaskum Tinawal.
Chief Bellegarde, thanks so much. And also thank you for the accompanying documents that were submitted, because it'll help us to keep track as we prepare. Mr. Clerk, is Mr. Littlechild technically okay?
I do see him. I'll ask him to introduce himself and tell us where he's calling from, and the interpreters will let me know if we can continue.
Littlechild, would you please go ahead on your mic just to get the sound check?
Good morning, mahikan mo teon sigason. Epebixquata koganos, uno ga siga teoma uteno. Mahikan mo teon sigason. Good morning to everyone, all your excellencies. My name is Willie Littlechild, and I'm addressing you from Ponoka, Alberta.
We're good. And so we'll go now to our 6-minute round of questioners. We have Mr. Schmale, Mr. Batiste, Madame Gill, and Ms. Gazan. Mr. Schmale, go ahead for 6 minutes, please.
Thank you very much, Chair, and thank you to our witnesses for being here. A very important conversation, and as pointed out in many speeches in the House of Commons, the Conservative Party does support the goals and aspirations of UNDRIP, and we do have some concerns with it, and that is no secret, I don't think, in terms of free, prior, and informed consent and what that actually means. So I guess, Chief Bellegarde, maybe I'll start with you if that's okay. You've stated previously that First Nations communities have the right to say no to projects. I'd like to understand what that means. So the Government of Canada currently has the authority to make final decisions with respect to the approval of major projects after meaningful consultations with Indigenous rights holders. Its current role involves giving due considerations to the concerns and interests identified by different rights holders and making a decision balancing those interests and the interests of the broader Canadian society. So I guess my first question to you is, sir, do you believe that Bill C-15 impedes government's authority to make a final decision if an Indigenous community says no?
Thank you, Mr. Schmale, for the question. And I'll make some comments, and I'll ask Mary Ellen as well and Willie to jump in after. So I'll be brief, but I've always said as Indigenous peoples, one of the most important rights we have is the right to self-determination. And that is the right to say yes or the right to say no. And each project should be assessed on its own merits, case by case by case by case. That's how it should be. And the whole push is to have the rights and title holders involved with public sector, private sector, and all levels of government jointly make decisions going forward. That's the best approach. And to me, that's what this bill speaks to, joint decision making, getting involved sooner than later. So you avoid blockades and you avoid legal battles. That's my quick comment to it right now. And I'll ask Mary Ellen and Willie maybe to join in as well.
Thank you, National Chief, and good morning, everyone, or good afternoon. I'm zooming into our circle from the territory of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh people on beautiful Vancouver today. I just want to contribute to the response to the question, just to say that some of the commentary about this bill, particularly promoting the idea that free, prior, and informed consent is a dangerous concept. I would just say, with greatest amount of respect, this is incorrect. And it does represent a kind of fear-mongering that's rooted in fundamental misunderstandings about how consent is operationalized, as well as the current status of the law in Canada. So the law in Canada is quite strong, that First Nations in particular on their core territories, when projects are underway, if they go forward without proper involvement, engagement, consent of the First Nations, there's been a significant amount of litigation because there's been uncertainty and some of these fundamental human rights principles have not been protected. So the concept of free, prior, and informed consent is already enshrined in law. How it's operationalized is the key. Certainly there's been a significant amount of work done on this, and in particular from the British Columbia context, where the UN declaration was fully supported in November 2019 and brought into British Columbia law. The concept of working closely, whether it's mining companies or other companies, they work very closely with First Nations from the beginning. And the whole concept is to operationalize that in a positive way that respects and upholds the rights of Indigenous peoples. It is not against development. Concepts of sustainable development and involvement of community are there. So the idea that free, prior, informed consent is some kind of a veto is simply not supported, and that is not how it's operationalized. So I would just add to the National Chief's response to your question to say that it is very important. This Article 19 is very significant. It promotes stability and certainty in the economy. It's quite a valuable concept. And our experience has been, contrary to some of the fear-mongering about it, it's a valuable concept, of course, internationally endorsed, to become part of, more explicitly part of, the statutory foundation of Canada.
Maybe I could just quickly jump in, just to clarify some misconceptions here. It's not that we as Conservatives believe that UNDRIP or C-15 will mean, that bill is against development. That's not what we're saying. I guess what we're asking is, because there's no clear definition, when a First Nation says no to a project, does that mean it's dead? Or does the government have the authority to make a final decision? I'll open the floor to anyone who wants to answer.
I'm happy to respond to that, to say, obviously, governments have authority. We've just had a decision from the Supreme Court of Canada on peace, order, and good government and the carbon tax. Governments have authority to make decisions in the best interests of a number of things. The key piece about this legislation and the issue you're raising is that the authority that government has, the executive or administrative branch of government, should be exercised in a way that's consistent with the rights of Indigenous peoples, which is something that hasn't been there for a long time. If government makes a decision and they know full well that they will be violating and infringing the rights of Indigenous peoples, The declaration speaks to that situation in terms of ensuring that if you're taking lands and resources of Indigenous peoples without fair process, that has to also be addressed. So we can't have this conversation in isolation. Clearly, the government of Canada has authority and powers. This is not removing any authority and powers. But what it is doing is saying, we want to end the process of this very colonial approach to taking Indigenous people's lands, supporting projects and developments on those lands without their consent, engagement, and involvement, and to operationalize a different set of practices. So the question really isn't for Indigenous people about what is the powers of government. The powers of government are well known. The issue is how they get exercised, and hopefully this bill will help us shift into a more positive direction.
Thanks very much for that response. Mr. Batiste, you have 6 minutes. Go ahead.
Okay, my first question is for Mary Ellen, and I know that you are a member of Indigenous Peoples Commission at the Indigenous Bar Association. I'd like to get your thoughts around do you believe that the UN Declaration is consistent with the Canadian Constitution, and specifically the rights in Section 35 and Section 52?
Yeah, thank you so much for that question. First of all, we all know how hard fought the rights were to be added into the Constitution Act in 1982 in Section 35, and as well as in Section 25 of the Charter. Unfortunately, the history of the last 40 years has been Indigenous people having to fight hard for the recognition of their rights, including for the recognition of their title. A lot of that jurisprudence has been really hard because for some of us who have been involved in those cases, the Crown has taken a very adversarial and hostile approach to the existence of the rights of Indigenous peoples, and it has been a challenge. But Section 35 of the Constitution Act is a very important provision that was fought hard for by Indigenous people. And while it has been interpreted mostly by courts where there's no Indigenous people present, those rights are very important. The Declaration as an international instrument is there to assist us to have a better discussion about the rights of Indigenous people in Section 35, because the Declaration brings good information and value in terms of what the standards, principles, and rights should be. So in my view, the Declaration is kind of like it's a way of interpreting our constitutional rights, that it gives us a better set of understandings of how to frame issues for Indigenous peoples. And I know the National Chief has spoken a lot about the issues of racism and discrimination. If we look at Article 2 of the UN Declaration, that says that Indigenous people have rights like all other human beings, including the right to be free from discrimination. I'm sure no one in this committee would disagree with that, but that isn't expressed very clearly in our charter or in our Constitution, and needs to be reinforced, because we have seen very much during, for instance, this pandemic, how much Indigenous people are experiencing systemic discrimination and racism. So the Constitution of Canada is there, those rights are there, they're important, but the Declaration provides, through this bill, an opportunity to promote a more reconciliation-focused approach, to get away from the high conflict adversarial approach, and to shift to recognition of rights. So it's extremely valuable legally, but it does not take away from in any way the constitutional rights of Indigenous people. And there is a non-derogation clause in Bill C-15. The National Chief has tabled some suggestions on how that should probably be strengthened to more reflect Bill 262 based on concerns of First Nations. But there is delicate balancing when we implement international laws, and Bill C-15 does support that.
Thank you very much for that, Mary Ellen. And my next question is for Grand Chief Littlechild. And I want to start off by commending you and commending the words of our National Chief, Perry Bellegarde, where he said, you've poured your heart and soul into this legislation. And I can remember almost 20 years ago being a member of the Assembly of First Nations National Youth Council, and as the chair of that organization, and sitting around the table of the AFN executive, where you came in and spoke to our need for government legislation around UNDRIP and for us to recognize it in Canada. And I'm wondering, after 20 years of this task that you've taken on, how does it feel for you to be able to see government legislation moving forward on UNDRIP today? And what can you give us a little bit of a sense of where we've been over the past 20 years to get to this point?
Well, thank you very much for your kind words. First of all, let me say I am not speaking for the Confederacy of Treaty 6 or the Treaty 6 First Nations. I am speaking as an individual, and the accurate time frame actually is now 43 years. Some people think 20 years was the debate. It was actually since 1977, before I think some of you were born even. But in any event, sitting here through the votes in Geneva and through the vote in New York and a potential vote here, I have to withhold my emotion and my horse races inside me until I hear the words royal assent. So I feel encouraged. I feel positive that we are going in the right direction. After all, we didn't go to the United Nations or to the Organization of American States to cause anyone any trouble. We went there because our treaties were being violated on a daily basis. And it was our elders and our leaders who instructed me to bring this attention to the global arena. The fact that our treaties were being violated again, actually, as we speak, they are very much so. So I look with anticipation that we will adopt this legislation, because I think there'll be a turning of a page in Canadian history to look forward to a more positive relationship throughout the country.
Thanks very much. And thank you, Mr. Baptiste. On now to Madame Gill, s'il vous plaît. 6 minutes.
Merci.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I would like to thank the witnesses who are here today for being here. It's highly appreciated. I have a question regarding the preamble, because it was mentioned several times by the AFN how important that is. And Chief Bellegarde earlier mentioned several amendments and changes that could be made. So what is the legal importance of this preamble and the amendments that we're being asked to make for everything that has to do with clarifying the law and legal interpretations? I don't know who can answer. Perhaps Mr. Palafox, you would be able to do so. Thank you.
I would, merci beaucoup, Madame Gill.
Thank you very much, Ms. Gill.
I would refer to our constitutional legal experts to answer that, the importance and relevancy of the preambular paragraphs. We did make some recommendations to strengthen them. And I'll ask maybe Willie and Mary Ellen, maybe Mary Ellen is to lead off with that response to your good question.
Yes, thank you for that question. First of all, the status of the preamble, as you know, preambles are an aid to interpretation. They are not independently enforced, but they are an aid, and they do state the framework for the legislation. So the preamble is important, and the preambular provisions to this bill are very valuable, strong, and important. As the national chief has submitted on behalf of AFN, there is a requirement, though, in our respectful view, for improvements. And in particular, we've highlighted 3. And I will speak, one is very straightforward, adding the word racism, which appears to be an oversight. But on the more substantive one, which is recognizing and denouncing the concept of terra nullius and the doctrine of discovery, that is important in the preamble. It, of course, remains open to members of parliament or senators to think about whether or not you would like that substantively in the body of the bill as well as the preamble. It does have force in the preamble, but it is quite important to be clear that the doctrine of discovery and terra nullius are specifically doctrines of moral superiority that should be rejected. And I know that's been testified to by others during these hearings. So the interpretive value of a preamble is significant. When there is ambiguity, the preamble is used and looked at, but the preamble does set the broad context of promoting reconciliation, responding to the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, and more importantly, in contrast to Bill 262, where Romeo Saganish's very important bill came forward, it did not have some of the preamble provisions that are here. It was a different kind of bill, a different time. But the emphasis on addressing racism, discrimination, and all forms of violence against Indigenous people is important in the preamble as well as in the action plan, because Indigenous peoples in the last number of years have been the target of specific violence in terms of when they have stood up to assert rights, and they have attracted that. We've had many issues with policing and so forth. And this is quite important, as National Chief has tabled today, that this preamble be strengthened accordingly.
Merci.
Thank you, Mr. Bellegarde and Ms. Turpel-Lafont. I have another question. I was interested to hear Ms. Turpel-Lafont earlier talk about certain discourses having to do with Bill 15, which could raise fear on the part of certain people if it's adopted. I would like to hear you a little bit more on this kind of discourse that is not necessarily objective, but perhaps shed light on everything that's factual concerning the project. If there are any other aspects you've noted in the discourse surrounding this bill. Thank you.
I'm certainly happy to say that to reflect on this. And there are two kinds of concerns that, as you well know, as committee members, that have been raised, and National Chief has spoken to these. First of all, there is an element of what I would simply call fear-mongering about the concept of free prior informed consent, that somehow that will cause economic damage or so forth. And in fact, free prior informed consent and operationalizing that by having industry, government, and First Nations work together appropriately early in the context of recognizing the rights provides more economic stability and certainty and security. And it should have been operationalized a long time ago. Unfortunately, many First Nations had to assert their rights and have them clearly recognized in the Supreme Court. So some of the fears around that are misplaced, in my respectful view. In the AFN, the chiefs of Canada have been very clear to say that this shift needs to be more complete. And that's one very important area. The other area I would just conclude by saying is there are concerns by Indigenous people about any legislation, because there has been a cycle of trust and mistrust in terms of the actions of government. It's very important, as I think a well-known Indigenous leader, Ellen Gabriel, has written just recently, that this bill has the potential to break that cycle of trust and mistrust and shift to a better foundation. And while no single legislation can do that, relationships need to be strengthened and supported. This legislation goes a long way to beginning that process. So very much supported at the legal and technical level. And of course, as National Chief has said, clearly mandated through resolution by the chiefs in assembly at the AFN level.
Thank you very much. And now we go for 6 minutes to Ms. Gazan. Go ahead.
Thank you so much, Chair, and I'd like to welcome all the guests here today to committee. My first question is in regard, and it can be for certainly starting with National Chief. Can you explain your understanding of Article 2.2 of Bill C-15, because it refers to Section 35, and some people claim because of that, the bill won't have any impact. Is that accurate for either National Chief or Madame Turpel-Lafont?
Maybe I'll ask Mary Ellen to go first, and then I'll make some comments right after her. I'm just going to bring up my act here. Section 2.2.
Yes, thank you. In terms of the provision that you're referring to, the reference in this bill to Section 35 is one that, again, has been the source of some misunderstanding, I think, in terms of some of the debate. Section 35 is in the Constitution Act. It was hard fought for. There are many First Nations across Canada that have fought hard to get their rights affirmed through Section 35, and they would very much like to have that there. However, we know that in interpreting Section 35, there have been decisions made over the years, really in a process that has not fully supported reconciliation and has not fully supported this. So there are concerns about some of those decisions and the harshness of those decisions. But referring to Section 35 is something that is pretty straightforward because we already have it in the Constitution Act. And the idea is not in any way to limit the UN Declaration to some sort of context of what it was decided in an individual case. That's not how legislation works. And that's not how Section 35 works. We're creating space with this bill to breathe greater life into Section 35. But those who choose not to, those First Nations who choose not to want to take their cases to court or to advance their rights in the context of Section 35 and prefer to rely on, for instance, their treaties specifically, there's nothing that's limiting them. So I would say that the language, and in particular the proposals the AFN has brought forward, these proposals have been carefully prepared for you and for your recommendation at this level by the National Chief, based on feedback and input from the Chiefs of Canada. And that is where it comes from. So we are recommending there are some improvements in the text to be able to provide greater support for First Nations who have brought forward these concerns. We don't think they're major corrections or changes. It's just a question of this is your opportunity to refine and improve. And we are recommending some refinements and improvements to you.
And just for to that, Leah, as well, like the new clauses that I recommended 2.4, for greater certainty, the rights of Indigenous peoples, including treaty rights, must be interpreted flexibly so as to permit their evolution over time, and any approach constituting frozen rights must be rejected. So we're trying to strengthen it because we believe Section 35 is a full box of rights. We don't want to get into that debate. Is it a full box or empty box? It's a full box with the inherent right to self-determination, self-government in there as well. We're just trying to be clearer in our recommendations within this new piece of legislation going forward.
Thank you so much, National Chief. I asked that question because I know that there has been some criticism or some concern that this act Canadianizes or makes UNDRIP subject to Canadian law and Section 35 of the Constitution. I would argue that's a legal misread. Would you agree with that statement? And if so, can you please expand on that? Madame Tripel-Lafon or National Chief?
I'd agree with that statement, but I go to my learned colleague, Mary Ellen, for further comments.
Yes, I agree fully with that statement. The Declaration is an international instrument. It does contain the minimum standards. It will, through this bill, the laws of Canada will be aligned to become more consistent through a process, and there is an action planning process. It does not take the UN Declaration and subordinate it to some other process. That's not how this works. International instruments, conventions, and the like must be implemented in Canada through implementing legislation like we have here or like was passed in the province of British Columbia. And it does not alter our constitutional kind of framework, but what it does is it raises our sights up. And it raises our sights up to a standard that's been long overdue. Of course, there's no new rights in the Declaration, but the way it is articulated advances meaningful reconciliation, as the Truth and Reconciliation Commission said, because the Declaration itself can provide a framework. And so I would be in full agreement with the statement that you've made. And unfortunately, some of the misunderstanding that is out there, again, I understand where it may come from because Indigenous people have had many, many bad experiences, both with government and elsewhere, in trying to assert and seek recognition of rights. This is a shift, and it's a shift that's a major shift in Bill C-15 because it puts us on the foundation of recognition and working together differently. It should not be adversarial, and which is why the Assembly of First Nations has very strongly supported this since when Romeo Saganash brought it forward into the House of Commons as a private member's bill.
So it would have application just as in terms of interpreting Indigenous rights, just as the Constitution, Indigenous law treaties, agreements, going forward, court decisions. Yeah.
I
Okay,
remember
perfect.
looking at that. Thank you.
Thank you.
Oh,
That
okay,
brings us,
thank you.
we're at time there, and we go to the 5-minute round now. Mr. Vidal, you're up first for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, National Chief, and the other witnesses today. We do appreciate your time and your contribution to this process. I want to follow up a little bit on what my colleague, Mr. Schmale, did in his first round of questioning, and then move on to a couple other things if I can squeeze the time in. Minister Lametti on Bill C-15 specifically said that if passed, this bill will not change Canada's existing duty to consult with Indigenous peoples or the other consultation and participation requirements under other legislation, such as the new Impact Assessment Act. I know you've responded to the question of veto, and you've responded to some of those matters to my colleague. Do you agree with this statement by Minister Lametti? Does the implementation of Bill C-15 change the government's decision-making ability in the context of projects?
I'll make some quick comments, and I'll ask my lawyer friends as well to make some comments. And thank you for the question, Mr. Vidal, and good morning to you. And I would say, and I was going to make my comments earlier on as well to Mr. Schmale's question about it. Federal government has jurisdiction, provincial governments have jurisdiction, but not to forget First Nations government as well. They have certain jurisdictions as well. So it should be a joint process, joint decision-making process, and our full involvement. That's what has to happen going forward. We've always been excluded, and that's the issue and concern that things need to be addressed going forward, that unilateral decisions cannot be made. There's got to be a cooperative, collaborative, working together approach, and that the rights and title holders have to be involved going forward. So that's my quick comment to that. Don't forget the other jurisdiction as well. Mary Ellen, maybe you can comment from the legal perspective. Willie?
Yes, I can. And I don't know the exact context in which the Attorney General made the comments, but I can certainly say that, consent is something that is part of the law of Canada now. In terms of the government's obligation to create a proper framework for consultation, engagement, and consent, that has been determined by the Supreme Court of Canada on multiple occasions. But it's important, again, to emphasize that consent and veto are not the same thing. And consent is not a veto over resource development. No rights are, of course, absolute, and government has government powers. We're acutely aware of that. One of the issues with this bill is to have operationalized that concept very early so that First Nations are engaged with as governments with the proper rights holders early in processes where there are developments, and that Indigenous people are not excluded from development. And in fact, if we look at some provinces like British Columbia, I think the highest number of new sort of mining permits have been given to companies working closely with First Nations, where free, prior, informed consent of the nations has guided that work. So I think the Attorney General's words about the existing framework, I'm not sure what they are. I do know Bill C-15 can add to and support that. But the legal framework is already...
Thank you. And I'm sorry, I hate to be rude, but they give me such limited time and I want to get to another question. So I appreciate that. One follow-up question. I've had a lot of people reach out to me, people that are concerned about linear projects, concerned about, the opportunity to develop linear projects. And many of these are Indigenous organizations that are looking to create prosperity for their communities and their members. And so my question a little bit is on a linear project. When I get you clarified the difference between veto and consent, but on a linear project, in your opinion, who is it that gets to give the consent or withhold the consent? Granted, not everybody's always going to agree. I totally understand that, but is there some clarity on your mind or clarity in your mind as to who gets to provide that consent or withhold that consent?
I'm certainly happy to respond to that, because one of the issues, as you well know, we're dealing with as we try and move away from this deeply colonial era of Canada's Indian Act is aided by the declaration, is that the rights of Indigenous people and Indigenous governments can, the rights holders select the governments, and they must be able to do that. And we've been seeing that revitalization in British Columbia in particular, where hereditary leaders have been able to move forward and enter into agreements and so forth. And so the question of who is the government that you work with. It has to be the government supported by the Indigenous people, not the government picked in the colonial way. Now, we are in a transition process. The challenge we have is if you have a proponent of a project and that proponent has engaged one or two Indigenous people and says that is appropriate license from Indigenous people to go forward, you will have a problem. You must properly engage with the rights and title holders and their government. And this is where much of the work of industry and government has fallen down. And this is where this Declaration Act and the shifts that will bring greater clarity to that process. Because certainly, even just getting the support of an Indian Act band, as an example, may not deal with all of the rights and title holders in an area where there's traditional territory held by an Indigenous people. And the Declaration Act provides support here. The Declaration itself provides a new framework. It can help reduce some of that conflict and, as I say, operationalize these principles better, both for business and for government.
Thank you very much. And Mr. Ananda Sangari, 5 minutes, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and really want to thank the esteemed panel for being here. It feels like deja vu. We were here a couple of years ago on this. I'd like to ask maybe first the Grand Chief Littlechild on the importance of legislating UNDRIP. Many observers have indicated that UNDRIP is being interpreted in Canadian law already. So the question is, why is it important to legislate it within the framework of C-15, and why is UNDRIP so important to the concept of reconciliation?
You're muted, Willie. You have to take your mute off.
I'm sorry, I was saying that, again, this is not for Treaty 6. I'm not speaking for them. See, now I forgot the question.
The importance of legislating UNDRIP and its contribution to reconciliation.
Yes, I was going to offer two examples of why we do this. The Jay Treaty is one example, and the other treaty is the Migratory Birds Convention. Those are international agreements that one, for example, the Jay Treaty only goes one way, because Canada did not pass legislation to ratify that convention, the Migratory Birds Convention. I'm sorry, the Jay Treaty. But they did in the Migratory Birds Convention by way of legislation. So we have a Migratory Birds Convention Act that allows Indigenous peoples to hunt migratory birds, for example, under the treaty right to hunt. And the same thing happens here with this legislation. In order for the UN Declaration to be implemented, we need this legislation to do that. So why is it important to reconciliation? That's the primary goal that I have in working on this. And there are at least 9 reconciliation in the bill. And to go back to the very first question that was asked about free, prior, and informed consent, that and the declaration are calls to action for us to work together. It's for us to work together. That's why this is important, the declaration. And that's why we, as a commission, set it out as to be the primary principle, that it is a call on us to work together, to have better relations, working relationships, for example. So that's why it's important. It really is key to going forward together.
Thank you, sir. I just want to ask on the action plan, and maybe Professor Turpel-Laflamme, if you could comment. I know you're in British Columbia, so the 3-year action plan that's contemplated here, the National Chief is suggesting it be reduced to 2 years. How realistic is it for a review of laws within that time frame? Because right now, as worded, it says the action plan would be completed as soon as practicable. So how realistic do you think is it to go to 2 years?
You have a minute. Go ahead.
Yes, I think it's realistic and necessary. And there's no reason why within the Government of Canada significant work can't be underway at this point to prepare for that action plan. And we have multiple recommendations of commissions and others that identify the core areas of the action plan. But it is important because the rights of Indigenous people are a priority. And if it's multiple years out, we will not be seeing progress. So I think this is a modest proposal. The National Chief has suggested that it be moved from 3 years to 2 years.
Thank you very much. Madam Gill, 2.5 minutes.
Merci, Monsieur.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Actually, I had a question on the fears that the AFN might have or concerns about the adoption of the bill. I know that National Chief Bellegarde mentioned the desire that, or the hope that we can get royal sanction by June, but are there any aspects that you would like to mention about the concerns of the association? Thank you.
Merci beaucoup, Madame. And again,
thank you, ma'am.
The only fear we have about the bill is just that we're running out of time. That's the biggest fear. We're already into April. You have May and June. The sitting days are getting few, and so we need to get it out of the House of Commons into the Senate as soon as possible. So my biggest fear is that we are running out of time and we'll have a missed opportunity again. And so we need to work together as soon as possible to get this passed. And we know as COVID-19, the pandemic's around us. We know, there's a budget coming down next week. We know there's an election coming. So we just need to seize this moment and not miss this opportunity to get Bill C-15 passed. It is a roadmap to reconciliation. And I think it's time that we get this done. And I'm asking all members of Parliament, all members of the Senate to get this done as soon as possible. That's my biggest fear, is that we're going to run out of time.
Merci.
Thank you, Mr. Bellegarde. And at the same time, I suppose that if we are able to move forward, it would be along the same lines of what you referred regarding the action plan that should be reduced to 2 years instead of 3 years, because we've waited too long. So I imagine that this would add to this desire to move forward quickly.
D'accord.
Thank you. That's all, Mr. Chair.
Thank you very much. And we go now to Ms. Gazan for 2.5 minutes.
Thank you, Chair. And my question is for National Chief. You already answered my question about your mandate to co-develop this legislation, but some have argued that a second mandate would have been required in order for you to support Bill C-15. I'd like to give you an opportunity to respond to that.
Thanks for the question, Ms. Gazan. And no question, we operate from our Chiefs Assembly mandate. And I indicated earlier, when Bill C-262 was not passed in the Senate, our chiefs met in Assembly and said, hey, National Chief, AFN, go get a government bill that's as strong as and or better than Bill C-262. And that is what Bill C-15 represents. It is a bill that's as strong as and or better. And part of that dialogue and support for C-262 was the eventual hope to see it into legislation. So that carries through to C-15. We have numerous resolutions of support for the UN Declaration itself, and as well for legislation going forward. So there's a lot of people, and it's First Nations politics as well. You know, some like it, some don't like it. Some will say, oh, National Chief should not be saying this. He doesn't have a mandate. We do have a mandate. And because of that mandate, we're pushing very hard for this. And it's an opportunity that we don't want to lose. And so that's my response to the question. It's a very good question. But we have a resolution by our AFN Chiefs Assembly, and that's what we're building on, and we're implementing that.
I would argue it's like Canadian politics with all the 4 different parties sitting around the table not agreeing on things all the time. So thank you so much for your clarification of that, National Chief. I'm just wondering, how long do I have, Mr. Chair?
45 seconds.
45 seconds. Okay. Do you believe that Bill C-15 will be a game changer for First Nations communities in terms of moving forward with a greater respect of our rights?
Yes, because you have to jointly develop a national action plan. You have to do that together. That's very key. You have to get the laws and policies of Canada that don't respect Aboriginal rights, title of jurisdiction, that don't respect treaty rights. They have to get in line. So it is a game changer. We're dealing with outdated policies that are about termination of rights, title, and jurisdiction. I'm talking about the comprehensive claims policy, the specific claims policy, the additions to reserve policy, the inherent right to self-government policy are all outdated. And they need to be changed and brought up to speed for recognition of rights, title, jurisdiction, and move towards treaty implementation. So it is a game changer. And this is going to be another arrow in our quiver. We got to launch it.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Ms. McZan. And Mr. Viersen, 5 minutes.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chair. And I want to thank the honorable witnesses for being here, particularly the National Chief. I understand this maybe one of the last times we see him here, as he is not running for re-election. So I want to thank him for his work there as well. The purpose of the bill, the purpose of the act, and you said you wanted to change the language around there. For me, that's where the big stumbling block comes in this bill, is the purpose to affirm the Declaration as a universal international human rights instrument with application in Canadian law. And what does that actually mean, right? So free, prior, and informed consent is a big part of that. But what does that now? Do we make duty to consult, the term duty to consult, which has been clarified and defined by the courts? Can we make that equal the same as free, prior, and informed consent, or do we then throw all that jurisprudence out and start over with a competition between the two concepts? Just was wondering on your thoughts on that. And because I think if we pull that piece out of the bill, the Part A, and just say like this is provides a framework for Canadian law, building of Canadian law going forward, that would be more tenable. But just wondering on your thoughts on that, Chief Bellegarde.
Well, just very quickly, thanks for the question. And I think I made some recommendations as my 12-point recommendations that I'm going to go back to and refer you all back to. That's what we'd like to see, to be clear in the purpose of the act. It's just the implementation of the UN Declaration, and to take out the words framework, like provide for the implementation of the Declaration. That's the purpose of the act. You have a United Nations Declaration passed by the UN. How do nation states give that legal effect? That's the purpose of the bill. And so we want to be the purposes of the act. And so I'm very clear on that. And I'll ask Mary Ellen, I'm kind of a Bush lawyer, but I'll refer to the constitutional lawyers.
Yes, I think a couple of things. The National Chief in the submission today, we've just first of all corrected it. It should be purposes of the act. There's 2, not 1. So there is an error there. So we're hoping that through your work as a committee, some of these issues might be able to be corrected. In terms of the comment that you made, though, about how does this impact existing jurisprudence and so forth, I think it's very clear that this will bring greater assistance in understanding some of these key areas, particularly where there's been a flashpoint, where there's been a denial of the rights of Indigenous people. It doesn't push aside all of the jurisprudence. It simply doesn't do that. The Declaration being implemented brings into the discussion the articles, rights, and standards in the Declaration. So it isn't quite legally as you suggested. Legally, what happens through the bill,
I don't think that it pushes them aside. It just introduces a new concept that we will now then have to argue about, right? That's
except with respect, the Declaration has been already used. The Declaration, parts of it, like the prohibition against genocide, has a status of customary international law. The Declaration has been used in court cases and used quite valuably in court cases to help understand these concepts. In particular, the work of the Canadian Human Rights Tribunal to address the rights of Indigenous children. There's been extensive reliance on the declaration there. So that hasn't taken anything away. It isn't a disruptive factor. It's additive and supports proper context and framework. So the experience to date is it is being applied, but when Bill C-15, if it should pass through this House and Senate, I think it will provide a more stable and clear foundation for that work to proceed.
Yeah, I guess my experience has been around lack of clarity when it comes to major projects decision making, is that that just postpones the project, and it doesn't allow for a quick decision making process, which then leads to the project just disappearing because the proponent of the project just moves to a different jurisdiction, does something else. We see that in British Columbia. There's the financial markets give the province of British Columbia a 1% risk factor when it comes to doing business there, and they cite UNDRIP as part of that, just because of the tension between the two different terms. And that I think, if we removed Section A, so we could leave the title as purpose and remove Section A, fix your framework word, and that would fix a lot of those concerns.
We're at time right there. Thanks, Mr. Viersen. We'll go to Mr. Van Koeverden, our last speaker for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I really appreciate everybody being here. Thank you for your leadership. Thank you for your guidance. Thanks for your recommendations. We are I'm quite in awe of the work that you've all done. And just to my colleague MP Kazan on the comment regarding disagreeing, I find myself sitting here and agreeing with you all the time. I hope it's mutual. I pretty much agree with you on this issue and most others almost all the time. But that said, there are some things that I've disagreed with, and I think a lot of us have disagreed with. And I was hoping that you could emphasize some of the mischaracterizations or a little bit of co-opting of ambiguities that I don't think really exist. So my question is perhaps for Madame Turpel-Lafond, who I could tell that you were anxious to answer the previous one. So I'll just give you the floor there, or really whoever would like to take it. But two things. The co-opting or sort of mischaracterization of an Indigenous perspective as somehow unanimous, and the continual mischaracterization as FPIC as being a veto or a roadblock in the way of progress. I'll let you go take it from there.
Sure. I'm happy to just say that it is fear-mongering to suggest that somehow the rights of Indigenous people will make the Canadian economy not work. And to point to British Columbia and say that is particularly laughable and inaccurate. I'm in British Columbia and I've worked very closely on the implementation of the declaration. An unprecedented number of mining permits went forward with the support of First Nations. And in fact, the implementation of the declaration has clarified the rules and operationalized the rules in a new respectful sort of structure. And we're seeing a lot of good work emerge. So that's absolutely the case. I think your other point about the tokenism, the suggestion that a single Indigenous person who may be opposed or whatever to something represents all Indigenous people. You of course, as a committee, will hear from not only the chiefs and leaders of the Assembly of First Nations, but other organizations, and to hear from the representatives of the Indigenous governments. But fundamentally, this bill is about changing how the Government of Canada works. So the Government of Canada and Parliament can get its relationships lined up in a post-colonial structure, not based on these Indian Act and other concepts that have constrained. So we need to keep the focus on what's happening here, which is this bill is an important piece of Canadian legislation that can help restructure things so that many of the disputes we're talking about that are roadblocks will be removed and usher in a new era. So no single bill is going to be perfect, but let's be really clear about what the bill does. And it certainly doesn't deserve the kind of fear-mongering that certainly we've heard about free, prior, informed consent.
I would also add to the question that it's before governments try to build anything, that they must first build a respectful relationship with the rights and title holders and build a relationship. And that will prevent blockades, that will prevent legal challenges, that will prevent, you'll find sustainable development projects going forward once that happens. And that's the key. Joint decision-making, full involvement and inclusion of the rights and title holders. That's what this speaks to. And to me, that creates economic certainty. That creates provinces and territories ripe for investment. So that's really good for the economy. And that's what we want to do, because First Nations, again, are starting to look at equity ownership in major projects. And we're moving past beyond the impact benefit agreements and revenue sharing things. Like, we're looking at equity ownership, but it's sustainable development going forward. And as long as the rights and title holders are fully involved with the different levels of government and industry, you'll find that good, sweet common ground. And that's really what that speaks to.
Thank you. We'll make sure that those comments are bold in the report, and I'll concede any remaining time to Mr. Chair. That was very thorough. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you all. I want to thank all of our witnesses today. This has been a really valuable exercise, and we have a lot to think about. We appreciate also the documents, as I mentioned earlier, Chief Bellegarde, submitting those so that we can have them in front of us as we make our deliberations. We will suspend briefly to arrange for our next panel. And so for the moment, we're now suspended.
Merci beaucoup, mes amis.
Thank you very much.
Second hour by video conference, we have representing Inuit Tapiriit Kanatami, President Nathan Obed, accompanied by Senior Legal Advisor Tanya Monahan. President Obed, you have the floor for 6 minutes.
Thank you so much, Chair. It is very good to be here with you all this morning on such an important topic. I believe that you have the submission that we sent along yesterday, and I'll just start by saying that I am the president of Inuit Tapiriit Kanatami, the national representational organization for Canada's 65,000 Inuit. We live primarily in Inuit Nunangat. Our homeland spans approximately 35% of Canada's landmass and approximately 75 to 80% of Canada's coastline. We have been instrumental in protecting Canada's sovereignty in the Canadian Arctic, and we have signed modern treaties or land claim agreements with the Government of Canada. We do not fall under the Indian Act. We have had many colonial experiences that are consistent with the treatment of First Nations and Métis, but we do have many things that are unique about our relationship with Canada and relationship with provinces and territories, and the ongoing colonization and now the ongoing reconciliation process in this country. Inuit Tapiriit Kanatami welcomes Bill C-15 as a promising opportunity to close legislative and policy gaps that contribute to human rights violations against the Inuit, as well as for preventing discrimination and providing recourse and remedy for human rights violations experienced by our people. ITK worked positively and constructively with the federal government on the development of Bill C-15 within a relatively short time frame for legislative development, as well as within the parameters of the government's legislative mandate. Recognizing these limiting factors, Bill C-15 should be further strengthened by amending it to include provisions that enable the creation of an independent Indigenous Human Rights Commission. We liken this to having something that is very good and making it even better. So the amendments that we have tabled are improvements upon our already positive support for Bill C-15, and as we already have provided support for Bill C-15 upon first reading. Federal legislation is necessary to implement the UN Declaration in Canada. While many articles of the UN Declaration are already recognized as binding rules of customary international law, affirmation of the UN Declaration in domestic statutes provides additional guidance on the legal effort of the rights affirmed by the UN Declaration. In the absence of legislation, Indigenous peoples are likely to continue to seek implementation of the UN Declaration in courts and in administrative tribunals. The UN Declaration fills the gap that previously existed in the international human rights regime as an instrument that promotes and protects the distinct status and rights of Indigenous peoples. The adoption of the UN Declaration by the UN General Assembly curbed attempts by traditional international law to subsume Indigenous peoples and entrench a colonial view of Indigenous nations, peoples, and communities. After 25 years of dialogue and negotiation between Indigenous peoples and member states, the international community managed to finalize every article affirmed in the US Declaration. Human rights experts associated with the UN recognize this gap in the human rights regime. Indigenous peoples work to create political pressure to respond to the alarming and urgent human rights violations facing Inuit in the Arctic and Indigenous peoples elsewhere in the world. In this regard, it must be noted that Inuit representatives prioritize this work through the Inuit Circumpolar Council, and representatives of the Inuit Circumpolar Council worked from 1982 until the UN Declaration in 2007 as leaders in a global Indigenous movement to for the UN to consider and ultimately adopt the UN Declaration. We were motivated by the need to develop a human rights framework that safeguards our people and the integrity of our communities. It's important to note that the rights affirmed in the UN Declaration are not new rights, but rather rights that have been recognized in domestic law in numerous countries across the globe and in international law. The outcome of the UN Declaration provides the distinct cultural context of Indigenous peoples, both as individuals and as collectives, with important economic, social, cultural, spiritual, gendered, and political rights that are responsive to our distinct status and rights as Indigenous peoples. C-15, as you see it before you, is very focused on two particular concepts. One, the alignment of laws and policies within this country to the UN Declaration, and two, the creation of an action plan. We do hope that we can focus this conversation and ensure that everyone who's reviewing it and everyone who considers it sees this as filling a gap in our human rights regime, in the Canadian domestic human rights regime. Indigenous people's rights are human rights. This is a class of human rights that needs this particular legislation. And we do hope that Canadians accept the rights of Indigenous peoples as human rights in this country. Nakumik, thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Obed. My first round of 6-minute questions comes from Mr. Viersen, Mr. Van Koeverden, Ms. Gill, and Ms. Gazan. Mr. Viersen.
Hello, thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you to Mr. Obed for appearing today. Appreciate it when he shows up. The crux of the bill is part 4, the purpose of the act, and there's 2 parts to that. It talks about affirming the Declaration as a universal human rights instrument with application in Canadian law, and the second is providing a framework for the Canadian government to implement that declaration. The implementation of the declaration as a framework, as an aspirational document, Conservatives have no issue with. It's the introducing of new concepts and new words that have not been tested by our courts into Canadian law that we have an issue with. I know as somebody who's worked on several private members' bills, oftentimes the way that I say things and then the way that the legislative drafters come back with it, and then I say, well, why do you use that word? And they say, well, because that word's been tested by the courts. We know what it means. The words that you want to use don't necessarily or haven't been tested by the courts, and particularly around the idea of free, prior, informed consent. That's a term which sounds a lot like the duty to consult, but it is a different term, and we haven't tested it in the courts at all. And so I'm just wondering, Mr. Obed, if you'd be interested in commenting just around the application of the instrument in Canadian law. Will that not introduce new terms and concepts that have not been tested in court and will lead to more court challenges and court decisions that we'll have to hard won and hard fought into the future, particularly around, from my perspective, particularly around large energy projects or large infrastructure projects?
Thank you for the question, and great to see you as well. I think that in our journey, Inuit have tried to work as productively with Canada and with provinces and territories in which Inuit live since we were forced to. And we have made many constructive arrangements with the Government of Canada through land claim agreements and other mechanisms that allow for our human rights to be respected, but also allow for natural resource extraction or education or government administration to happen in a way that is consistent with the international human rights regime. Yes, there is still a reckoning that Canada has, and this bill is a part of it. And is one of the main reasons why this is so important, is that Canadians understand and recognize that there is still work to do to respect Indigenous people's human rights, and that there are a class of Canadians that do not have the same access to recourse and remedy for violations of human rights as other Canadians. The larger conversation around the risks associated with the adoption of this particular piece of legislation on particular sectors, I think that there's been a lot of conversation back and forth about that, and I'll echo some of the statements that are made in previous sessions where a stronger foundation of respect of Indigenous people's human rights leads to a stronger economy and a stronger foundation that any corporation who wishes to work with Indigenous peoples or on Indigenous peoples' lands will be in a place to be more prosperous, not less. That being said, Inuit in relation to First Nations and Métis have much more clarity around a number of these foundational steps, and our land claim agreements should be upheld and seen as ways in which the rest of the country can work with First Nations and Métis, especially in resource extraction or in governance or in relationships with government.
Well, thank you. So would there not be, again, I'm tripping over this, the difference between free, prior, and informed consent and duty to consult, which granted has been, those questions have been quite answered in none of it, for example. But would it not be more helpful to have that maybe in the clarification part of this bill, where we just say, like, for greater clarity, free, prior, informed consent and duty to consult are equivalent equivalent terms?
30 seconds.
Yes. Again, the UN Declaration is an amalgamation of existing human rights that Indigenous peoples have. The interpretation of an international instrument is another thing. So whether Canada likes it or not, Indigenous peoples globally have the right to free, prior, and informed consent. I think that's the most important concept here.
Thank you very much, Mr. Obed. And we go to Mr. Van Couverden for 6 minutes.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Hi, Mr. Obed. Hi, Ms. Monahan. Thank you very much for joining us today. It's lovely to have you with us. In place of an acknowledgement, I just want to acknowledge the tremendous impact that the Inuit invention of the kayak had on my life. There's no single thing that has provided my life with more purpose, and that's because Inuit invented something that I enjoyed for my whole life. So just a nakumik for that. There are a couple of big fundamental issues that this committee, some members of this committee, have really struggled with developing any sort of consensus around. In the previous hour, we heard from Chief Bellegarde and others about the lack of ambiguity between the terms free, prior, and informed consent and veto and others. But another large stumbling block that my colleague indicated that we seem to be tripping over is the acknowledgement of systemic racism and solutions for systemic racism and some of the things that systemic racism has led to. And in previous visits to this committee, Mr. Obed, you've talked about systemic racism having a significant impact on the poverty and the injustice in Inuit Nunangat. And I know that this bill and UNDRIP won't solve all of those problems, but I would love to hear from you on ways that you can imagine UNDRIP getting us a little bit closer to that mutual ambition of a far less racist Canada that will provide more economic, social mobility and greater human rights to all Inuit.
Thank you for the question. Great to see you as well, Adam. I can't help but think right away about the link between free, prior, and informed consent and education or language. It isn't just natural resource extraction that we're talking about, and that Indigenous peoples have the right to. And think about, in this country, there are places where there is a society with a dominant language that is not English or French, with land claim agreements, with relationships with the government of Canada, but no recognition of Inuktitut, our language, as an official language of our homeland by the federal government. We're not talking about a few people here and there that have somehow managed to maintain an Indigenous language. We were talking about entire regions of Inuit Nunangat whose dominant language is Inuktitut, whose language on the streets, whose language in the house. But this country still does not recognize and do what it has to uphold our linguistic rights in the education context, in the workplace context, in administration of services. These are the types of things that over time, the UNDRIP legislation will hopefully allow us to address more substantially than we have in the past. We went through 5 years of Indigenous language legislation conversations, and ultimately, Canada could not find a way to figure out how to uphold our Indigenous linguistic rights in our homeland. This type of legislation will allow for a greater foundation to have those conversations and demand that, especially at the federal level, that the recognition of our existing human rights includes the recognition of our rights to use our language in our communities, and also in the way in which we interact with the federal government.
Thank you. Ms. Monahan, would you care to comment at all on any of the legal matters that are maybe specific to Inuit Nunangat and C15 that we may have missed from AFN? I'm not a lawyer, so I can't really ask you an appropriate question, but I would ask for your insight.
Thanks for including me in the questioning. I think what is an important point to make from an ITK perspective is that we've already looked towards what work we can do in terms of identifying Inuit priorities throughout the implementation of the UN Declaration. Seeing royal assent for this bill is a really critical step in advancing that work, but through the Inuit Crown Partnership Committee, we've already prioritized the advancement of this work and the early identification of Inuit priorities into the information informing of the action plan itself, but also just looking at how we can take article by article implementation moving forward should this bill advance and receive royal assent. So we're already looking forward to moving that work forward and hope that we're able to see this work advance, and Inuit priorities are a large part of the inclusion of the implementation, of course, taking a distinctions-based approach. Thank you.
We're down to 10 seconds.
I'll concede.
Thanks very much. And we move on to Madame Gill, 6 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Mr. Bedad, for being here today with us. Your testimony is highly appreciated. I heard Mr. Obed in his speech at the opening talking about an independent commission of Indigenous peoples. I know that it's a request for an amendment that the association has made several times. I would like to hear you speaking in greater depth on that, please. Thank you.
Thank you for the question. I will start on a conceptual level, and then I'll allow Tanya to speak specifically to some of the considerations within the proposed amendment. The legislation as it stands is quite broad, and the creation of an action plan has great potential, but it also is so broad that it doesn't necessarily give us the confidence that an action plan alone will allow for recourse or allow for remedy to happen in places where Indigenous peoples' human rights or classes of human rights by classes of Indigenous peoples have been violated in this country. There is an existing human rights regime in this country, but I think we can all agree that historically it has done a very poor job of hearing, understanding, and then ruling on Indigenous peoples' human rights violations. The ability for this bill to change the landscape in this country for Indigenous peoples is largely dependent upon the ability for an individual Indigenous person or a group of Indigenous peoples to find a way to have recourse for active violations of human rights. So this particular commission that we have been lobbying for since 2017 would aid and abet that particular process to ensure that Canada actually does change and that there is a place where Indigenous peoples can go other than the existing human rights tribunals that would have expertise within this particular area of field and would allow for meaningful solutions to the outstanding challenges we have around human rights violations against Indigenous peoples. Tanya, would you like to add comment?
Sure. So maybe I'll begin by noting that the ITK Board of Directors met recently and passed a resolution to unanimously support the passage of Bill C-15, noting the interest, as President Obed marked in his opening statement, the interest to seek some improvements or strengthen the particular section of the bill in order to advance this commission concept that's been a longstanding position for ITK. So in the written brief that's been circulated in both languages to the committee for consideration, at page 4, there's a lengthy section of proposed amendments that really delves into the concept further. The proposition to strike section 6 to sub B is really just an interest to carve out a space where this would realistically fall in the current structure of the bill. So there's an interest to, of course, acknowledge the establishment of the Indigenous Rights Human Rights Commission, as well as to lay out some interest in content and how the strategy could be approached to develop this further, including, of course, familiar language and other legislative mechanisms, associated time limits, advisory committees taking a distinctions-based approach similar to what we've seen in the Indigenous Languages Act, as well as the consideration of the appointment of commissioners. So I'll end there. Thank you.
Merci, Monsieur Aubette, Madame Monaghan. J'aurais une...
Thank you very much, Mr. Aubette and Ms. Monaghan. We don't have much time, but I have another broad question about your willingness to, or what's a priority for you in Bill C-15, apart from getting it adopted because you have a series of amendments, and perhaps also hear you on the question of the plan of action afterwards as to whether you also want the plan to come forward in the shorter term once the bill has been passed. Thank you.
1 minute, go ahead.
This is incredibly important for Canada to recognize and affirm the UN Declaration and make its first attempt on harmonizing Canadian law with the provisions within the UN Declaration. It's a massive undertaking, and this legislation really just scratches the surface on that. And if you look at it from a obligation perspective, really the obligations in real terms are the creation of the action plan and then the tabling of the action plan in the House of Commons. So even though this is a tremendous undertaking, it really comes down to goodwill and across a number of different priority areas. And we would love to have that goodwill, and it starts with the passage of the legislation, and then it rolls through to the co-development of the action plan. We will get to the content pieces as they are presented to us. But yeah, this is a new relationship, if you will.
Thank you very much. Ms. Kazan, please go ahead, 6 minutes.
Thank you so much, Mr. Chair. And my first question is for President Obed and as well Madame Monaghan. What if impact, if any, would Bill C-15 have on Inuit communities, some of whom have signed onto modern treaties?
In many cases, Inuit are ahead of the curve when it comes to signing and implementation of modern treaties. That said, there are still outstanding human rights violations that affect Inuit as well as First Nations and Métis. I don't need to look much further than the National Inquiry on Murdered and Missing Indigenous Women and Girls and their final report and their calls for justice to give examples of how there is a gap, a human rights gap between what exists for other Canadians and then the challenges and the rights violations that happened to Inuit women in Nunavut and in Canada. This land claims didn't solve everything. They really were a focus on land transaction, on security on both sides, but mostly, for the federal government in relation to land title, and then a new relationship in the way of development and in governance. Land claims didn't really solve the challenges in relation to healthcare or education, or just broad human rights challenges that Inuit face in relation to racism. So this piece of legislation and the creation of an action plan, the implementation of an action plan will truly fill in those gaps where we have strong foundations in our modern treaties, but we also have huge social, especially social gaps that weren't covered in those treaties that still are outstanding today.
Thank you. Maybe I'll give time for Madame Monaghan to respond as well quickly, and then I have one other question.
Okay, just quickly, I'll maybe jump onto the land claims implementation and some of the social inequities that President Obed had referenced throughout the work of the Inuit Crown Partnership. There's 10 priority areas that have been identified. A recent one is, of course, what I had referenced earlier, the legislative priority section dedicated towards looking at the implementation of the UN Declaration and ultimately, hopefully, through this particular bill being passed into law. Through that process, we do see the interest in advancing some of the areas which we've seen some delay, maybe some interest in having a different approach, identifying policy gaps, looking to implement policy and work in response to Inuit priorities identified through the land claim regions. And through ITK in order to see the full implementation of the bill. We utilize the Inuit Crown Partnership as a forum in order to use the leadership and senior officials levels to ensure that there's transformative change and a whole of government approach in the way that inequities are faced and challenges that Inuit face. So we see the opportunity here as a building block that's also intersectioned across all of the 10 priority areas through that particular forum. And we're hopeful that, of course, at the core of that is the struggle with some issues through land claims implementation and the ability for the bill and that particular process to right certain wrongs that have been at the top of the experience for Inuit lately. Thank you.
Just one follow-up question. One of the suggestions we've heard at this committee time and time again by the Conservatives, and certainly repeated again by my colleague, Mr. Viersen, is to incorporate a definition of FPIC into Bill C-15, something that I believe would be somewhat dangerous to have one definition for all situations in Canada, given our very diverse political and legal context, modern treaties 1 to 11, unceded territories. I was wondering if you could comment on that.
Thanks. The UN Declaration is more than just one particular paragraph, and free, prior, and informed consent is really a small part of a much larger picture of the recognition of Indigenous peoples' human rights. It's unfortunate that some political parties or some individual Canadians have decided to fight Indigenous peoples' human rights and the assertion and implementation of our rights through this particular mechanism. I find it has no merit. I also do not agree that we should take any one provision of the Declaration and define it within a Canadian domestic construct within a legislation that is meaning to do something very different. So that's
we're at time. The committee will, to get the next round of questions in completely, we'll need to extend. I need a motion to extend. Ms. Gazan, would you move that we extend the meeting?
I move that we extend the meeting.
In favor? That's carried. Thank you very much. And we go now to our 5-minute round. I have Mr. Vidal, Ms. Zan, Ms. Gill, Ms. Gazan, Mr. Schmale, and one other. And Gary Vidal, please go ahead for 5 minutes.
Actually, Chair, I'm going to take Gary's spot.
Go ahead.
Okay. Thank you, Chair. Thank you, witnesses. I just want to continue on the conversation we were just having that Ms. Gazan brought up. And, we as legislators, we have to examine every piece of legislation. Not every piece of legislation is perfect, and we have to vote yes or no on the words of the legislation. Now, we have seen many organizations come forward that are concerned about the lack of definition of FPIC. So I just want to clarify, Mr. Obed, and I appreciate your comments. Is the ITK satisfied that if C-15 were to pass, it meets the UNDRIP requirement found in Article 19?
I'm sorry, under Article 19 or a particular piece of legislation, domestic legislation, can you clarify the question, please?
So under Article 19 of the UN Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous People, it states that states shall consult and cooperate in good faith with Indigenous peoples and to obtain their free, prior, and informed consent before adopting and implementing laws that affect them. So I guess what I'm asking is, how is it possible that C-15 can move forward without doing that consultation ahead of the passage of the bill?
There was a co-development phase of the legislation, which included the Assembly of First Nations, the Métis National Council, and the Inuit Tepree Kanatami. We, on our part, have worked through our Inuit Tepree Kanatami Board of Directors. Those 4 presidents that sit as our voting members are presidents of the 4 Inuit Land Claim Agreement regions and are elected by each of their constituencies. They have the confidence of their particular people, and then in turn direct Inuit Tepree Kanatami to have national positions. Tanya Monahan had referenced the passage of a resolution last week supporting C-15. There are also, on a concurrent path, consultation sessions that the Government of Canada has had with Inuit in relation to this bill. I think it is for each of the Indigenous peoples of this country to answer that question for their respective peoples. And for Inuit, we have a democratic process that has led to the support of this bill. There has been a federal consultative process, which happens in every single piece of legislation that is not exhaustive to every Canadian, but attempts to understand and hear and incorporate the views of individual Canadians, as well as the positions of representatives of Canadians. So I believe that for Inuit, this has been met, and the legislation should proceed, but I cannot speak for First Nations or Métis.
Okay, so would it be fair to say that all Inuit communities have been consulted?
No, I don't think that that's a fair statement. The consultation process by the federal government is not exhaustive in any piece of legislation at any time. And just like the individual position of an individual Inuk is not ever going to be unanimous for any one issue. I think it's interesting that we are still at a place in this country where Canadians choose whether or not to believe Indigenous peoples have self-determination based on whether or not it suits their interests. I've just outlined a democratic process. I've also outlined the Canadian government's democratic process to pass legislation. And by the terms that you're presenting, I don't think that any piece of legislation would ever pass in this country.
Well, that's exactly why we're trying to get a definition of free, prior, and informed consent. And I think if we have to do our work here in the committee process, in the legislative process, and if we don't do that, it leaves a lot of unanswered questions and potentially the courts to decide that definition if we aren't doing everything we can in this forum in the legislative branch. And we have put forward many arguments from Indigenous communities that have raised concerns about this process and the fact that there isn't a definition and it isn't clear, and the lack of certainty. We've heard from organizations that are saying this could hamper development going forward. It could significantly increase the risk factor on major projects. And so this is why it's so important. And look, we support the spirit of the legislation. We just want to ensure that we do our work here so that there is certainty going forward and that the courts aren't determining this 5, 10, 15 years from now, continuing to hold up this process.
Okay, we're at time. Perhaps a response can come in the next rounds of questioners. We go now for a 5-minute question period with Mrs. Ann.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you to the witnesses for being here. And I have to say, time is of the essence, and I do believe that we've been waiting too long and we need to move on with this. We've heard from many different witnesses who have said that this will actually help decide projects going forward and take away some of that uncertainty. So I am of the mind that we need to move on with it. And so I wanted to ask Mr. Obed, in addition to the specific Truth and Reconciliation Commission calls to actions 43 and 44, which call on government to fully adopt and implement the declaration and develop an action plan to achieve its goals, the declaration is also referenced throughout the calls to action and in the final report of the National Inquiry into Missing Women and Girls. So can you expand on why you think that the Truth and Reconciliation Commission and the National Inquiry both emphasize the declaration as such a key part of reconciliation, and also offer your own views on how this could help prevent the blight of racist, misogynistic violence and femicide of Indigenous women and girls? Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for the question. The Royal Commission on Aboriginal Peoples, the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, and then the Murdered and Missing Indigenous Women and Girls Inquiry all had different mandates, all had different reasons for being, but at the heart of it was human rights and the violation of human rights for a specific group of people in Canada. It happens to be that there were First Nations, Inuit, and Métis in all three cases, but the findings are then consistent in that human rights are being violated today, and that there is a necessity for the government of Canada and for Canadians to understand this reality and address it. The UN Declaration is a tool. It is a very powerful tool in an international human rights context, but it is one of many tools that that not only the commissioners of the MIWG and then all of the witnesses who brought forward testimony during that process talked about. It is then also something that through the Truth and Reconciliation Commission became such a massive part of the reckoning of the residential school experience, which was the unbelievable human rights violations that took place over the course of upwards to 100 years in this country in communities across southern Canada, communities that you probably lived in, you being committee members, happened. And we have the ability now to set a new course and the ability to affirm human rights instead of violate them. We have the ability to do better as a country and to respect First Nations, Inuit, and Métis women and girls instead of put them at risk for genocide. These are the things that we can do today. And this bill allows for this movement to push forward rather than the status quo of the past, which has done so much harm and has been encapsulated by so much thoughtful work over the past 20 years and so many tears through the witnesses and the people who lived through this and continue to live through this today. And their voices need to be heard. And this is one of the ways where the government of Canada can say, yes, we have heard you. This country does need to change. And this international human rights instrument needs to be fully implemented in this country.
Thank you. And I have to say, I have heard you and I hear you. You've also indicated that your position, ITK's position, that Bill C-15 would be strengthened if it were amended to include the establishment of an Indigenous Human Rights Commission. Could you expand on that a little bit about why that is so important and your thoughts about others who've said that the development of the action plan could be used to explore this establishment instead?
We're right at time, but try briefly. Go ahead.
Yes, thanks for the supplemental. The Commission is filling an implementation gap. Really, it is a mechanism to allow for the greatest possible implementation of this piece of legislation. It is merely meant to be an aid. And I would hope that committee members would read it and imagine that this particular commission would help do the best possible job of implementing the spirit and intent of the bill.
Thanks so much, Mr. Obed. Madame Gill, 2,5, s'il vous plaît.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. At the last session we had of the committee, some raised the idea that it might be a good idea to include in the preamble the issue of women, and Mr. Obed mentioned this earlier. Do you think that it would be something we should add, the whole issue of women, in the preamble of the bill? Thank you.
Thanks. Maybe Tanya, as somebody who is in the co-development process, could you address that? And I'm supportive of any language that recognizes the importance of women and girls in this particular process. Tanya?
Thank you. In terms of the co-development process that President Obed referenced, ITK had an interest and position to ensure that there was inclusion in reference to the implementation of the final inquiry report and the calls for justice. So in terms of making references specific to women and addressing issues that have significantly impacted Indigenous women and girls, also interrelated family violence with Indigenous men and boys is of a particular priority for ITK, and any inclusion of reference to these to strengthen the bill would be a positive change. Thank you.
Merci, Monsieur Obed. Madame Monaghan.
Thank you, Mr. Obed and Ms. Monaghan. Perhaps to conclude, the concerns that you may have concerning the bill, things that are not being included, or amendments or ideas that you may have. What are your main fears or concerns about it? Thank you.
Yes, we've listened closely to not only Inuit perspectives, but Canadian perspectives in relation to this piece of legislation. We've also listened to ministers and the government speak about Indigenous people's rights and what may happen with the adoption or passage of Bill C-15. I think that there is sometimes an overstatement of what this bill actually will do, especially on day one. And, industry's fears about natural resource extraction, I think that is a strange boogeyman that exists, but is very less of concern to me when it comes to the implementation of this bill than it would be to how to use the provisions in the bill to get the change that we all believe and want. And we desperately need for the bill to pass, but we also need for it to be strengthened.
Thank you very much. Ms. Gazan, 2.5.
Thank you, Chair. I want to go back to the question. I mean, in addition to the Conservatives holding Indigenous peoples and Indigenous people to a higher standard of democracy than we even see in colonial electoral systems, I want to go back to this question again, that one of the suggestions that we've heard at this committee by the Conservatives, repeated again by Mr. Viersen, this is for Madame Monaghan, is to incorporate a definition of FPIC into C15. I think that would be somewhat dangerous to have a single definition for all situations in Canada, given our diverse legal and political context. Again, modern treaties, numbered treaties, unceded territories. Could you please respond to that? Provide your thoughts on that. Thank you.
I think of your question in light of how we came in prepared to discuss the proposed amendments for the inclusion of the Indigenous Human Rights Commission. And part of the intention behind the language that's before you, I'll lean on to answer your question in relation to defining FPIC in the bill. We see it as problematic. It's not providing the space and the time for consultation and dialogue between each of the distinctions-based groups. There's very distinct and unique circumstances and relationships with the Crown between all three, First Nations, Inuit, and Métis, that we simply do not foresee an ability to include such detailed language or definition to confine and to create limitations on what could be discussed and elaborated on and interpreted moving down the line. So in terms of, I know I'm leaning back into the proposed amendments that we're seeking, but there was an interest to have a broader approach there, which I think would also be like the response that to the question of having an FPIC definition. It's just simply not a good way to respect the distinct nature of each group, and also to rely on the information and the dialogue consultation necessary with rights holders and other interested groups. Thank you.
Thanks very much. Mr. Vidal, do I have you for our next question?
I think you do, Mr. Chair. Thank you so much. And I'm working on a 5-minute slot, right, Mr. Chair? Thank you. President Obed, I want to just talk briefly about the action plan for a couple of minutes and just give you an opportunity to respond to that. Many of the witnesses we've heard, many of the people that I've talked to have expressed a desire to, pursue that action plan in the context of removing some of the uncertainty, being able to provide clarity to some of the questions that people on all sides of this debate are asking. I think back to when you appeared as a witness on the oath that we talked about, and you talked about a lot of the, the work that had been done ahead of time, and it should have been pretty easy to move from the oath to the actual booklet and information that was to be provided to new citizens. In the context of the action plan, we've heard people talking about a wasted 3 years with what happened after Bill C-62 to now, and I'd be curious to your perspective on if that's some time maybe lost where we could have been developing the action plan and getting a bunch of the frameworks, getting a bunch of the kind of rolling up our sleeves and doing the hard work that could have been done to remove some of the uncertainty and to bring clarity to many of the questions that people are asking about this piece of legislation.
Yep. Thanks for the question. Our position doesn't include specific revision to the timeline, but I think the points that you raised are very well taken, and government does need time, but it certainly seems as though in all of the processes that I've been involved in or am privy to, that it's always a rush at the end. And in many times, a 3-year window ends up being a 6-month work plan, whether it's a piece of legislation or whether it's a specific amendment to a program, government is famous for not doing things unless it is under a very strict timeline. And I'm talking about any department at any time. And so if the time frames moved and moved closer, that also would hopefully indicate a goodwill and the ability to see this as the priority it is.
Thank you for that, sir. I'm having trouble unmuting myself all of a sudden here. And you can all laugh at me, that's okay. I want to pursue that discussion maybe just a little bit further with Ms. Monahan. As a senior legal advisor, we just heard the president say that, if everything gets left to the end, we end up kind of rushing at the end. And sorry, I'm an accountant, not a lawyer, my history is, but I can assure you that when I'm rushing things at the end, that there's a greater risk of me not getting it right, so to speak. And from a legal perspective, I'd be curious if you have, just some thoughts on the fact that, when we rush it all to the end, we try to ram it through at the end. What's the risk of not getting it right and not getting the consultation process right?
Well, I can only speak to the process for Inuit as part of ITK. And as I had referenced earlier, the connection through the Inuit Crown Partnership Committee, we've already slotted space to prioritize this particular work through this relationship and these priority areas, specifically under legislative priorities, and looking towards the identification of Inuit priorities to implement the UN Declaration and identify priorities as they will be framed in the action plan. We also have an opening and an obligation to look towards a strategic work plan as part of this Inuit Crown Partnership. And for Inuit, we see that space as the ability to ensure that Inuit priorities are front and center, that there's an ability through that process, which is inclusive of not just ITK, but also the 4 Inuit land claim regions, as well as representation from Puktudi Inuit Women of Canada and the Inuit Circumpolar Council of Canada. So through that particular forum, we see the opportunity to not just roll our sleeves up and get the work done, but also to ensure that we keep our federal counterparts accountable through the structure and governance of the committee. We have an ability to do those check-ins throughout the year, should it be 2 or 3 years, and that's how we hope to ensure that Inuit priorities are accounted for. However, we can't speak to the other groups and the complexities that some are faced.
Thanks, Ms. Monahan. And our final questioner is Marcus Pawlowski, 5 minutes. Can't hear you, Marcus. Still can't hear you. You're on mute. Now you're not. Looks like Mr. Pawlowski has a technical issue, Mr. Clerk. He's not on mute. I don't see it.
Hear me now? No.
Yes, we hear you.
Go ahead.
Is the sound quality adequate? Can you? It's
not quite. Now you need to put your headset back on. It's dangling.
That wasn't working, but let me try again. So.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
You can. Okay, so international agreements have to be incorporated into domestic law for them to be legally binding in the country. Now, with this legislation, that's what we're doing with UNDRIP, but we're not the first country that's done this. My understanding is a number of other countries have, in some way or the other way, incorporated UNDRIP into domestic legislation. So the Conservatives are quite concerned about the interpretation, the legal interpretation of free, prior, and informed consent. my understanding, when the courts look to interpret such terms, they look to international agreements to inform their interpretation, and perhaps to what other countries have done, other courts in other countries have done when interpreting those provisions. So again, given the fact that I don't think we're the first jurisdiction to be doing this, can I ask you what the interpretation of those provisions have been in other jurisdictions? Does it mean a veto?
The term veto does not appear within the provisions of UNDRIP, especially in regards to free, prior, and informed consent. It is very clear, and it is an international instrument. Just like conventions, just like the UN Charter, it's just so fascinating to me that somehow for Indigenous peoples, all of a sudden the rules of engagement from a domestic Canadian perspective to an international community are out the window. We don't have these conversations in regards to the UN Charter. We also don't have this regards for on the rights of children, on the rights of many different conventions that are attempting to allow for human rights to be expressed and enjoyed globally. But somehow with Indigenous peoples, that just doesn't seem to be acceptable. And that is really frustrating. The interpretation globally in regards to free, prior, and informed consent, we have great examples of nation states that have recognized this concept. We also have many nation states that have not, and that have violated Indigenous peoples' human rights and have not allowed for free, prior, and informed consent. I do hope that Canada wishes to be among the former and wants to uphold Indigenous peoples' human rights and the rights that all peoples have. I mean, free, prior, and informed consent really is an international concept. It isn't exclusive to Indigenous peoples. And the democratic processes that are put in place by nation states to allow for these rights to exist and for people to exercise themselves of them is what is happening here today in real time. And I do hope that people can appreciate that.
Ms. Monahan, do you want to add anything? I think I don't have much time to ask another question.
I believe that President Obed summed up ITK's response and position on your particular question. Thank you.
How much time do I have, Mr. Chair?
30 seconds.
I'm gonna throw out a question that you're not going to be able to answer in 30 seconds, which is the Inuit position from the historical experience of the Inuit in Canada differ significantly from the First Nations position with respect to UNDRIP?
Inuit Tapiriit Kanatami has not been in necessarily the same rooms as First Nations and Métis in the last 10 to 15 years when it comes to UNDRIP legislation in Canada. We have had our positions all the way through. They may have been slightly different than First Nations or Métis, but in the development of the declaration itself, Inuit worked very closely with First Nations and Métis domestically, internationally, and then also with the global Indigenous community. And so we really did feel as though we were a part of a global effort to create the declaration.
Thank you very much for that. And thank you so much again, witnesses. It's been a remarkable session, I think, for all of us on the committee. And I believe we're honestly working hard toward a resolution of these things. But in the meantime, we'll be meeting again on Thursday on this very topic. With thanks to our witnesses, this committee is now adjourned.
Nakumik, thank you, everyone.
Thank you.